Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. And today I think I've got a rather special one. Today we're looking at things like the ether, water, biodynamic gardening, food security, the foundation of sacred science, you might say. To help me along with this rather fascinating interview with two wonderful people is Rachel Russell. Rachel, and she joins me now. Hello, Rachel.
Hello, Richard. Thank you so much for having us on.
Oh, it's a pleasure. You've been on the show a few times now, which is fantastic. A friend of the show, and we recently attended a fascinating garden experience together, understanding the rhythms, I suppose, the biodynamics of the earth and how to improve our gardening, and all of that. And today we're going to have a conversation which I suppose was primed from a couple of talks that you did in Birmingham a few weeks ago, which is very successful, with one particular interesting gentleman who I did talk to very briefly in a video. We've left the audience tantalising over what it's about. Tell us what we're going to be talking about and who we've got, Rachel.
So, hello, Richard, and hello, everybody. What we want to do is we want to bring up the knowledge base for everybody. And so Thomas Joseph Brown and Harry Rhodes actually did a show with us. So one was in Toft Manor, which was a beautiful event. And then we did another one in Birmingham, and it was titled Water, Ether and the Secrets of the Universe. And so we've got Thomas Joseph Brown with us again today. And it also kind of leads us into the food side of things, food security, and different ways in which we can utilize all these energies and all this knowledge, bring it all together. But we're sharing what actually happened and all the presentations, etc., online. So at our new website, it'll be live in a couple of days. But yeah, so it's hiddenrainbowevents.co.uk. So both videos will be available on there. And that's free because we do want to bring up the knowledge base. But I'm here to introduce Thomas Joseph Brown and the magic of the universe, because I don't know about the synchronicities in everyone else's life, but everything is just literally coming together. We've got so many different things going at the moment. We've got a LIT project also, which is to help change the structure and create new, essentially, in this world, because we really need new. We're fed up of this current system, so we're building new.
We're very fed up of the current system, aren't we? People are so under pressure and everything seems to be against them.
Yeah.
It's about time we turn the tables.
Exactly. So, and that's what we're doing. We're wanting to create change, and so we're yeah. That's a separate subject, is the LIT project.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
it's a much bigger project. But in terms of kind of understanding the basics, the foundations of everything, and how do we work with all these energies in the universe that we didn't necessarily understood that existed even in the first place. So I'd really love to introduce Thomas Joseph Brown, and just kind of, I suppose, introduce the water ether and the secrets of the universe. I'm actually going to a conference on just early next week. It's an international conference held in Portugal, all about water. And so Vida Austin, I don't know if anyone's heard of Ida Austin on this channel, but she freezes water and she puts her energy essentially into that water. And water is very receptive to our consciousness, which is fascinating because we are mainly water. So these things are all intrinsic. And so I popped to see her on Tuesday, actually, and find out more about how she got into water and the secrets of it. And yeah, so it's then kind of, it goes on its journey, does water, with many different people and how we utilize in our daily lives. Anyway, I'm waffling. So I'm going to introduce Thomas Joseph Brown.
Hello. Yes. Hello, Thomas.
Hello, Richard. Thank you for having us back on.
It's lovely to see you again, and thank you for coming along. And I regret that I was busy, as my life has suddenly turned in that I was unable to see or be in person at your talk up there. But I'm thrilled that we can all get to see it now once it's been released on the website. So maybe you could...
Rachel got professional crews in to film it and edit it, so totally appreciate everything Rachel has done around all of this.
Absolutely, she is a star. So tell us, water fascinates me, and I've had a few people on talking about water and putting energy back into water, obviously cleaning water, and anti-fluoride people against water. This is something even more different that you talk about, especially when connecting water to the ether.
Right. Well, as I pointed out in my talk at Toft Manor, people think of water as H2O. As I
Right.
say, you get hydrogen and oxygen when you dissociate water. But when they're combined, they're like magic, literally. As I say, the soul of the universe. So we know that there's water from the center of the galaxy, and it's been seen in other galaxies, what they call water masers, which is like there's water clouds. They're getting energized by something, and they're getting these distinct water bands. There's other ones too. There's organic molecule masers. There's a lot of life around galactic centers, which aren't black holes, but that's another subject. But and the water, it's everywhere. I remember when I was young, they say, well, probably Earth is the only place with water.
Right.
But now we know it's everywhere in the universe. We know there's the watery moons of like Jupiter and Saturn, and all the way to the center of our cells, where our DNA and RNA are surrounded by billions of water molecules whose structure actually controls our health. And what I showed in the talk, we did everything, went from university research from like Martin Chaplin at University of South Bank, London, where they're doing like the electron and X-ray diffraction of water to study the molecular structures and finding sacred geometric forms in there, all the way to Jerry Pollack with his easy water exclusion zone. And Jerry's the chair of the conference, which Rachel is going to, which I unfortunately can't make this year. So I get into that. I go to the university research to show that there's something serious. And then we get into work like Dr. Emoto and Vida Austin to show that consciousness influences water greatly. But then also all these other experiments that show that water reacts when different substances are in water, like they are in our system, colloidal, like our blood, they react to the cosmos, to solar and geomagnetic activities. So we're totally saturated with water. It's everywhere around us. We are water. That's why I sort of subtitled, becoming hydro sapiens.
Right.
And we're not really becoming it. It was just really more becoming aware of it. But the title sounded good.
I mean, I've got a glass of water here, knowing that we were going to be talking about water, and there's so much said about water. And you meant there we go. And because I understand that water can talk to water over distances as well, but there's so much stuff that just turns your mind around. I was going to ask you: is water then conscious itself?
Yeah, but maybe not. Maybe not the type of consciousness that we're in right now when we're discussing these things, but as sort of like the unconscious soul of the universe. Absolutely, it's reactive to us and reactive to the motions of the cosmos. As I point out, like you held up a glass of water, that's actually one molecule, right? It acts as a single molecule. So like the oceans, they're like a big molecule. They're complex molecules, and they get structures inside. And that was like all the work I was showing, the sacred geometric patterns they're getting from the X-ray and electron diffractions from there, which the main ones are icosahedral. Then we go back to Plato, and Plato said, in Platonic solids, he put the elements related to, in the icosahedron, he called water. And Martin Chaplin said, well, he wouldn't have been wrong because that's the main structure. So how did Plato know that?
Wow.
Higher knowledge. So, so absolutely, water is conscious, and it controls our conscious. Like Linus Pauling's work, which I brought up, he believed he did a paper on how he thought that water structure in the brain is what actually made anesthetics work. And then I did some research, and I think that may be potentially what allows like psychedelics and neurotransmitters to, connect with, the receptor sites in the brain. So water probably controls far more of our consciousness and being than we're aware of at this moment.
Yes. One of the things that we're certainly aware of in the country at the moment is the amount of pollutions that are in all our water, and trying to find anywhere that's pure. unless we are filtering it ourselves or using reverse osmosis machines or distillation, and then having to put minerals back into it, is a huge problem. I don't know whether that's an area that you talk about the way that water has been poisoned, I suppose.
Well, I can use an example. I live in Bali, Indonesia, and all of Bali is laid out with what they call the Subak system, from up the main lake, Lake Batur, and these underground springs, pop up at wherever they come up, they've got these sacred temples, and they're all praying for the water every day, and it goes into the Subak, which is this organized irrigation system, and there's actually a special group. They've got Subak temples and things, and the whole culture was based around that, but yet they throw their rubbish into it. It's like there's been this like dichotomy of something.
Right.
And people go, well, because they don't know, they used to eat off of banana leaves and now they're getting, I go, yeah, look, it doesn't take that much to figure out. But we can extrapolate that to the world. Humans have
Yes.
fouled their nest.
Yes.
I'm not a believer in anthropogenic climate change, it's coming from outside, but we have certainly fouled our nest. Yes.
Yes, absolutely, we have, and we don't seem to learn from it at all, which is a shame. So we've got Hans Gunter joining us as well. I'm fascinated then to know how the water affects things like biodynamic gardening, because we all need water to grow. We're worried about the food security of the future, because we've seen, certainly in this country, an attack on our farmers. And it may be that the farmers have been doing something a bit old-fashioned and not really very valuable over the last 100 years. And perhaps water is a clue to some of that. Hans, would you like to join us?
Absolutely. And
And
great
hello
joy to
to
be
you.
here. Thank you very much for having me and sharing the biodynamic and universal knowledge that is needed really to put things into juxtaposition and context, because I think we're looking too often with a tunnel vision into certain subjects. And I know Thomas and Rachel and you really opening it up to see where the connections are. So I'm really appreciating that. Thank you.
No, it's a pleasure. I mean, this is something that a lot of people are sort of very much at the beginning edge of something that's so intrinsic to all our lives. So it's so important to get this information out and make it mainstream rather than just very niche and for just a few specialists. But going back to the water then, I know I've been on your weekend, and you are a biodynamic gardener. You've been all over the world doing this, and you've been showing people how to use not just normal gardening skills, but intention and the ether and all of those things, which to some people might sound a bit strange. But if we just go back to water, as we started with that, clearly water is vital to the growing of plants, gardens, and feeding animals as well.
I totally agree. Water is, I would say, at this moment more essential to heal and to recognize its consciousness and make whole the consciousness again than what we hear often about regenerating soils. Because
Yes.
although we need both together, and if you look at traditional agriculture, obviously when the landscape was intact, we had forests and we had deep, rich, humus-rich soils. That was our water storage, and it made sure that the water penetrated and we had all year round water. Whereas even in England now, we're having water shortages and, standpipes. There are certain periods in the 90s and the 80s where we had 4 years of 40% of rain. And so we run out of water, even in Britain. So what I would suggest is really to look at this new approach that we, like the traditional farmers would say, we are as rich as a farming community as the depths of the soil, not just the surface area. And through biodynamics, I could add to it and say, we're as rich as farmers in terms of producing food and healing food as we can have not just depth, but also height and width and connecting to the cosmos. Because just like Thomas pointed out, we think the resources are limited. And that's how I got involved through the Club of Rome in the 60s to really come here, becoming a teacher of biodynamic agriculture and universal agriculture, which basically shows that water is being generated. And biodynamics, particularly with Steiner's impulse, has shown us through alchemical herbal remedies that we can actually, like I've proven in the States, having droughts of 6 weeks, generate water. So you don't need to even have irrigation, which also is polluting because you use plastic piping and all that stuff, and it leaks heavy metals into the food and what have you. So how can we get away from technological solutions to living solutions, becoming conscious of how to work with water in a living and regenerative way?
Well, I mean, that just sounds staggering what you just said, generating water without, the use of pipes. So could you explain what you mean? How is that possible? How do we generate that water?
In biodynamics, we have very simple herbal and mineral and animal-based preparations, which you could say it's a modern alchemy or modern shamanism, with modern consciousness and science having proven for 100 years now, with experimental circles working in more than 60 countries, that wherever you go, where you have this most severe climatic conditions, these biodynamic preparations are restoring the health of the water body of the earth, and henceforth the regeneration of the soil, because without water, there's no biochemical reactions, there's no life, the soil is dead, it's dirt. So actually, as I said earlier, the water is actually the higher common denominator that we need to work on to heal the soil. So we're going into tunnel vision if we just think of the soil life or the soil as a living organism. It needs to be bigger than that. And the water, as Thomas pointed out, is the consciousness and the connection. In actual fact, I dare say it's the body of being that is bringing to the earth the creator consciousness so we can become co-creators.
But that does sound fascinating. Let's just go back to Thomas. Thomas, this is using the consciousness element. Is that where we start to connect to what people call the ether?
And that could be one way of looking at it. I think water basically is connected to the ether in a sense, because we have the elements and the ethers, which are related. So the water element, which is not, people say, well, it's the states of matter, but it's not. That's a very shallow approach to them. But then we have what we call the chemical or the tone ether from Rudolf Steiner's etheric sciences. And that one, it's like suctional. And I worked, as I presented in my talks, one of my good dear friends who's passed away some years ago, Trevor Constable, who's become the etheric rain engineer. And he could basically make it rain on clear days with basically geometric devices. And one of the complaints about Trevor, people go, well, he's stealing rain from somewhere else. And he said, no, he said, I'm literally screwing it out of the ether. I'm creating it. And also Victor Schauberger, I don't recall the exact, but he mentioned creating water in a vacuum through some of his experiments. So that would be coming from the ether in that sense, for sure.
So does this, when you say you're stealing the rain from somewhere else, or you're creating it, does this come back to sort of these ancient knowledge where people would say, oh, it was just a myth or it was just silly? When you hear of these rain dances that people did, that actually they're using intention or some mental function in order to create that rain?
Oh, I think that's totally possible. There was a book, A System of Caucasian Yoga by Count Stefan Kolonowalewski, which supposedly had some of the secret teachings of Gurdjieff in it. And in there's actually a thing for creating rain, where you stand there and put your hands into a thing of water and stare at the sky. But I showed that in my talk, what we call ocular cloud busting. That basically, if you go out, preferably with bare feet, and stand on the ground and stare at clouds, you can see them dissipate. It takes a little bit of time. It's not going to happen in a minute or two. But I've done that many times over the years. And you can actually extend them out. If you look over to the side, then they'll start building out, which is how cloudbusters work, the old original Reich versions. So yeah, absolutely. Consciousness, because the weather is water, right? It's moving water around.
Right. Yeah. I do remember reading in Dr. Emoto's book, he says, you can fix your attention by pointing at a cloud and you can make it dissipate, which it's amazing.
I've done it hundreds of times over the decades for sure. But, for like what Hans Gunter was saying, for sure, we're dealing with, trying to bring the biodynamic agriculture is like trying to bring the agriculture back into a community organism. So we're reconnecting with the biosphere in that sense. And it is a modern alchemy. People talk about how, well, alchemy, they pre-chemistry, they didn't know any better. They were trying to make gold.
Yes.
But the truth is, it was this whole spiritual level of dealing with like gold in the sun and silver of the moon. These were not just simplistic, animistic ideas, but it's Lily Kalisko, who was one of Steiner's leading scientific proteges out of the natural scientific section of the Goetheanum. She did 4 decades of experiments with metal crystallizations in liquid, because it has to be in water, aqueous solutions, and reaction. So to get a simple example is during a solar eclipse, when the moon's in front of the sun, the gold won't crystallize properly. It's like and the lunar silver reactions come out stronger. I showed this in my second talk that I did, which will be on the website, the Foundations of Sacred Science. I got into that a little deeper. So these are actually scientific experiments, and not the kind you can see on a meter, but you can see the effects in the crystallization properties.
Right.
So there is a scientific basis to it, but it comes from more what we call the qualitative sciences, not the quantitative. You can't weigh and measure all of this stuff. But like I'm sure Hans Gunter can confirm, you see the reaction in the foods.
Yes.
Well, plants react.
Absolutely. Hans, I was going to say, I mean, this approach is, if it's, some of it must be ancient knowledge, and some of it must be a combination of using the science that we now know and going, oh yeah, that all makes sense. How do you find students when they come along and you're telling them the stuff that you do, and they're going, hang on a minute, this is really far removed from traditional teaching?
Well, you wouldn't believe it, but you show them how it works. So
yeah, it's a simple answer, isn't it? Yes.
I'll give you an anecdote. When I lived in the States and I had the drought, and I curtailed the bolting of lettuces for 6 weeks with no drop of rain, 35, 38 degrees centigrade on sandy soil, the surrounding farmers asked, well, how do you do that? I said, well, I use the biodynamic preparations. You can reverse the evaporation in plants using the preparations in a certain way. So I did that for 6 weeks, and I was like getting a bit tired, and also coincided with my birthday, and we did a rain dance.
Right.
We did a rain dance, and yes. I trusted the traditional example of making a huge fire with a lot of smoke and dancing around the fire with my apprentices. And I didn't warn the director, nor did I call the local fire brigade, because it was in the States, you had to apply for a fire permission and all that. I didn't know about that. I almost got fired doing it. Then what we did in the evening, I had my birthday party. We had 36 djembe players around my house, which was close to the farm. And we drummed quite wildly. And guess what? It bucketed with rain.
Wow.
Now, I know from my scientific meteorological research, if you put enough dust in the air through the smoke and through the stamping the ground, barefoot, of course, as Thomas pointed out.
Yes.
And if you're up to it and your feet are not city feet in shoes, anyway, you do that. You throw up the dust. Well, where does rain form? Around dust particles. And right. I've seen from an aeroplane in Mexico that the dust from a fire and the smoke goes up to about 3,000, 4,000 meters when I was flying across a big fire, and it formed the cloud. How do you agitate the cloud? With drumming, with low bass sounds. And then if the cloud's big enough, it precipitates. And that's what it did in the States, in Connecticut, where I lived.
Wow.
The other way is you teach them very practical ways of gardening where you can generate water through hoeing the soil. So the saying is, the best watering can and the best fertilizer for the farmer is actually the hoe.
This is
if you're aware
of that you're doing like this,
like a shuffle hoe, like not the English straw hoe, but the shuffle Dutch hoe, which sort of goes shallow through the ground, and you just break the surface,
right?
Cut the weeds and break the surface. If you're aware of the diurnal rhythm of the earth breathing out, which we work with in biodynamics, which the traditional farmers would be all aware of. And you have a waxing moon that draws moisture up into the air. You can dry the soil out. If you hoe the soil in the morning with the breathing out of the earth and the waxing moon. If the moon is waning and you have the moisture retreating into the earth and you hoe in the afternoon, you can create rain. You can create precipitation, up to 2 millimeters a day of precipitation without irrigation. So this is how practical biodynamics is when we apply rhythms of the lunar cycle, of the earth rhythm, the day rhythm, and then of course there's many other rhythms that we're teaching, but through practicing it, and then the next day you come and you go, oh my God, the plants are twice as big or much greener, healthier, and standing up like soldiers.
Well, I was going to say, and I think Thomas was just referring to it, the results is, I mean, not only say in the size of the plants, but probably the quality of the food that you're eating, and the not just, you know, in vitamins and minerals, but in something else that,
yes.
that I can't quite put my finger on what it is, that is
Yes.
is part of you and the planet and the cosmos and all of that.
I'm
new to this, so I'm fine trying to find the words.
You did a beautiful gesture, Richard. You were
right.
It's better. It's better quality. This feeling,
Yes.
this uplifting feeling. How do you get that? You smell the food. I mean, you walk past a really good bakery or, you know, a good butcher. Sorry, those who are vegans, but for me, that's, you know, my taste buds are starting. I'm salivating, right? Digestion starts in the mouth. So if you've got food that has beautiful colors and I look at them and I'm like already like it's like some people need, you know, through mushrooms or whatever psychedelic experiences. I have that with food. If I have the rainbow of produce in front of me, I see it on my plate with flowers decorated with flowers, my mind gets stimulated.
Yes.
And then the stomach gets working away and you digest the food better, you destroy it better, and you get all the light, all these colors, and all the sound that is in the plant, and all the substances from the healing substances, you know, polyphenols, what have you, vitamins, minerals. You get a gamut of substances that are stacked into the finer and finer ether, so to speak, even the scent, you know, of food, the smell of food, and then the texture of food when you taste it. All these organoleptic qualities make us nourishing, give us nourishing experiences. Then you eat the food in community, have wonderful conversations, beautiful environment. You get nourished on a different level. I don't know if you experience that with, you know, celebrations, particularly you have that present.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, the sad part is that certainly in the UK and probably certain parts of the West, we've lost that celebration of food. And I mean, we go and buy dead food in the supermarkets, and you just get none of what you've just, you know, that wonderful experience that you have explored. You don't get any of that, and mostly people are eating on their own or watching screens, and they're so separated from that, which is an area that we've really got to get back to, because we're missing out so much.
Yeah. And I mean, if you take the example, very simple example, where you don't have to have a feast or all these colors, but take just a carrot.
Yeah.
Go into a farm shop and buy a carrot, which is not a F1 hybrid carrot bred. It's a traditional, like, heirloom variety carrot, or even a purple carrot or a rainbow carrot.
Oh, yes.
And you start smelling them and you start chewing them. And then you compare it with even an organic carrot that comes from Spain, from an organic holding, which is over fertilized with organic liquid fertilizers. And you think of celery from Spain, for example, you know, it's just water, almost no fiber in it.
Yes.
You chew on one and the other, the incredible aromas and flavors that get released through an organically or biodynamically grown carrot that has been composted, the soil being fed with compost and with green manures and with love, is going to be a different flavor experience and a different texture experience than having your watery, fluffy, non-crunchy, you know, just bland water flavor carrot that has no texture, no flavor, no stimulation for your satisfaction, because
Yeah.
you need to eat more. So where does obesity come from? Is from the food that's bland, the food that's watery, the food that doesn't have all these stimulants in it, and then we're undernourished. And Rudolf Steiner promised in 1924 in the agriculture lectures, he's talking, at the end of the last century, people will starve in front of full plates because they don't have the nourishment in the food anymore. And we can see it now.
And
Chronic illness and health disease cycle here in Europe and in the States and places just abysmal.
Thomas, I mean, Hans has just given us an amazing window into the life that we ought to be having, and especially the food that we should be eating, and how that then resonates with us, and how we can, be with one another in a much more dynamic and vibrant fashion. How do we take the knowledge that you have about the sacred sciences and get that into the everyday person so that they can share in this wonder?
That is a very good question, and something we think about all the time.
Right.
I mean, Hans, he's been out there putting his hands in the earth all over the world, so he's going to have these amazing connections. The way my life has gone the last 15, 20 years, I've been mostly working in the intellectual realm. I really miss gardening. But one of the things I wanted to point out, plants are intelligent. They can see, they can hear, they react to our emotions. There's actually a vine, talking about seeing, there's a vine down in the Amazon that basically it mimics, to hide itself, it mimics the plant that it grows on. So it actually, each of its leaves make the same pattern as the leaves it's growing. And there's actually examples. I was just reading this book called The Light Eaters by Zoe Schlanger. And she's saying she went and studied these, down in the Amazon. And they even had one that wound all the way up through the jungle, went by 5 different species, and the same plant had 5 different types of leaves on it.
Wow.
They say, well, how in the world does it know this, right?
Yeah.
There must be some sort of site or something that it can figure out, unless, somehow it's like by wrapping around, it's picking up DNA or something. But anyway, so knowing that they're conscious, that's part of our interaction with this. So from my perspective, it's basically education. And as I point out, the later part of both of my talks is I tried to bring it into where we're bringing this into practical technological aspects with water structuring devices and bioarchitecture. And there's a lot of bioarchitecture and biomimicry around the world right now. But my research associate and partner, Juan Schlosser, he's one of the leading lights. People don't know yet. But I'll show him other bioarchitecture people are doing. He's going, that looks pretty, but it's not the right geometry. So the geometry that he's using, which I introduced him to some years back, is what we call path curve geometry. And this actually comes from what's called cosmological botany. And I want to say, when I first met Hans online a couple months ago, within a couple of minutes, we realized we were speaking the same language, talking about Ernst Lehrs and Lawrence Edwards. And Lawrence Edwards was an English researcher, and he did all this research on bud forms on trees, right? He's up the ladder with his micrometer, checking these things month after month. And what he showed is that different species of trees reacted to different planets in the moon. So wherever the moon and the planet were in opposition or conjunction twice a month is when the buds came into their most perfect shape. Because this is path curve geometry. You're dealing with 2 separate sacred geometric curves. So I introduced this to Juan. I just knew it in general. He's a geometric genius. And he's been able to apply this. So the bioarchitectural structures that we're designing now are based on this, which we could say then is an outgrowth of the biodynamic movement and reconnecting with the cosmos. And I also mentioned in my talk, which people see when they watch them, is Juan designed this temple which is being built in India, a new Jain stupa. We have a very good friend who's a leading Vastu architect in India, and he understands Juan's approach to geometry, so he asked him to design it. And it's like a giant lotus temple, which are being built. and it's actually a capacitor. It's kind of like Trevor Constable's etheric rain technology, right? We're incorporating all of these ideas into it. And what Mayank told me is that when they've been constructing and putting up the really big leaves, this thing's big, and we show pictures of it in the talk. It's a massive thing, that a lot of engineering to make it happen. But as they're setting these things in place, they're noticing that atmospheric changes and getting light rains over the site, which is not that it's making it rain. What it's doing is it's harmonizing the biosphere around it. And this is what biodynamic agriculture does. Like Hans was talking about how,
Right.
he could control the weather, or I don't know if control, we'll say coax it is a better word, to interact
Yes.
with it,
Yes.
to bring it in. So yes, we're trying to do the same thing with bioarchitecture, water structure devices. Our biovortexer we're developing and just bringing to market uses the same principles. So we've taken Schellberger's work and brought it forward. And what we believe is, where Schellberger was doing a lot of things intuitively, we believe we've figured out how to engineer that using this cosmological botany approach.
There's a lot to sort of take in, isn't it? But I suppose that the wisdom is this business about really being connected to all the rhythms and the life force of it. And why is it then that, and there may be nefarious reasons behind all of this, as we know we're in a strange world, but why is it that we have pretty much, certainly in the West, walked away from something so beautiful and useful to us all, and gone down these very narrow alleys?
Well, according to Steiner, it started around the time of the Copernican revolution, and then all the scientists.
When was that? Excuse my lack of history. When how long?
Oh, that was somewhat 400 to 500 years ago, when the thinking shifted from Earth being the center to Earth going around the sun, from Copernicus's work.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so that, and Galileo, I like to blame everything on Galileo.
Yeah.
Kind of
fault,
tongue in
mate.
cheek, but it's true, because everybody knows Galileo for the telescope and his work with that, the phases of Venus, which show, and the phases of the moons around Jupiter, where he was able to show that there actually is a basis for the heliocentric model. But little known is that he actually became armaments master of Venice. And most of Galileo's work was actually on cannonball trajectories. And basically, that's what they're still doing at CERN, right? They're still smashing Galileo's cannonballs. Right? They haven't advanced. It's all smash things together, straight line. This is what Steiner tried to bring us out of, with higher modes of thought, bringing in Goethe's conceptualities of living systems and how to create new organs of consciousness, by understanding like the full growth of a plant. So say you look at a plant and you recognize it's a plant, but at no point, if you hold up a rock, you can see the whole rock, it. You look at a human, it's the whole human, unless they've had an accident or the doctors chopped him up. But from birth to death, it's the whole human. But a plant exists in a different etheric time. So the only way to know the whole of the plant, from seed to flower and fruiting and seed, is to build this in your imagination by studying the plants. And this actually opens up new organs of cognition, which you're then able to apply to other areas of life. So for me, the first time I came across this some decades back is I was studying geology. I started thinking, this is what the Earth does. Forget the standard geological stuff. The Earth goes through these transformations of metamorphic stages. So yeah, that's basically I'm not sure where else I'm gonna go from that.
No, as you were talking about that, I was reminded of what Alan Watts, the philosopher from the sort of 60s, used to talk about there are no edges. There's no, you hold something up. Where does it really end? It doesn't really end. It sort of morphs into something else because of the molecules and everything else. And we know that humans, for example, have a biofield, and so it's like where do we don't really end at the tips of our fingers. It's just our eyes see one perception, but in other layers we extend. And as you were talking about that with a plant and things, there's the things that we can't see, and we can't probably see the relationships between the earth and a growing whatever. As it's interacting, which And that sort of goes back to what Hans is saying about, you know, using intention or the cosmos or thought or, you know, these things. Because we can't necessarily see it, most people just think that, well, it doesn't exist. It's all a bit woo-woo. But when you start to realize, actually, as you just said there, you know, going back when the earth and everything was all interconnected so organically, it all made sense. And then we tried to separate everything.
Well, talking about the biofield, we do have a plasma field around us. It's measurable. And as Robert Temple pointed out in his recent book, The New Science of Heaven, absolutely brilliant book, highly recommended, on
The New Science
plasma.
of Heaven.
Yeah. But he's pointing out that in this plasma field around us, we've actually got about 1 meter of bacteria and stuff hanging around us out in the air, right? So we're interacting. So where is the edge? I thought of that when you mentioned that. And with plants, we're symbiotic with plants. We have an individuality and individuation because we need it to sustain our biological units. But at the same time, we're really just what I call anthropic consciousness nodes in the biosphere. We can't live without plants. We give them our carbon dioxide. They give us our oxygen. We're part and parcel of the same organic family.
Yes. So we just go back to Hans on that then, because that's worth just exploring a little bit, if that's all right. Yes, the edges of plants, we think of them as we see them. But as Thomas has just said, there are bacteria hanging around in the biosphere. Do you work with that when you're growing food?
I think this is a very beautiful entry into looking at how the invisible, the supersensible, becomes visible.
Right.
Because Thomas, you talk about the bacteriological life and the fungus, the bacteria, the microbial life. Well, before Pasteur, before we had a microscope, nobody thought of that. They called it the evil witches, to keep the evil witches away with garlic or with mistletoe and hang it up. And they didn't know the scientific, repercussions of certain substances warding off microbiology because they're antiseptic. But right. The same is happening for us right now with these invisible forces, the ethers, as we call them in anthroposophy, or in the traditional sciences. Scientists used to call it ethers because they didn't have a better name. The invisible, and how that manifests and differentiates. It's differentiated ether forces, as Thomas tried to elucidate earlier, with the different ethers: the earth, water, air, light, and warmth ether. And they manifest in the elements and then manifest in structure and minerals. Now, if I take that now and go, the zodiac that we know from astrological point of views, and we know now, and enough people know that astrology is a sound science, and we can link people's qualities back to their birth date and do birth charts and all that.
Yes.
Why wouldn't that influence plants?
Right.
Depending where the sun and the moon are.
Yes.
But for the plants, the more important heavenly body is the moon. So depending where the moon is in the constellations, it will modulate to the earth different force field to create different structure, different flavors, different colors, and different nutritional quality and density in the plants. And
right.
There are people who have done for over 50 years experiments to sow plants in different times of the moon going through the sidereal zodiac and coming up with the realization that the structure of a plant changes if I sow it in a constellation of the Virgin or in a constellation of the Archer, for example, just like our astrological makeup is changing as a human being. So we're familiar with that, but with plants, we think it's far out, it's woo-woo. It's not.
Right.
It just becomes then visible and touchable through the texture and the different expressions that the plant shows. So there's all that research out there. Now there comes another element to it, which we usually neglect. And Thomas, again, you say we have this field. The humans have this field.
Yes.
We are actually the universe folded in. Everything that's in the universe is inside each human being. So each one of you here, and you are listening there, you are a universe. That means we have the zodiac and all these forces inside. How do they manifest? Well, the herbalists of the Middle Ages and Paracelsus knew we had temperaments. And the herbs had temperaments, and the herbalists knew which herbs to give to who according to the temperaments. So we heard of choleric people and sanguinic people and phlegmatic people and melancholic people. I bet you, Richard, and everybody there listening, if you go in the garden, you're more influential through your temperament and your mood or attitude or intention, than what the stars can influence now. So a lot of biodynamic farmers and gardeners don't realize how much we as humans have evolved as individuals. You asked this question earlier, Richard. Why did we forget all that?
Yes.
We had to forget it to recreate it from within.
Right.
To recognize and raise our consciousness from within and connect it back together. And now we are the stars. We are the moon. We are the planets. We are the gods. But each one in a little drop in a little body, being the universe of, the big ocean that Thomas talks about. The whole ocean is one molecule. The humanity is one humanity of God. We are God. We're God consciousness. And so there's so much hope that we can recreate with these new insights that we're gaining of the invisible, bring it into the visible, and make it very practical.
Yes. So I'm going to go back to Rachel now, because you were here at the beginning. Rachel, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation, and I know that you're somebody who embraces all of this. How do you feel about being the universe and being a god in what you do?
Well, there is so much to learn, and
Isn't there?
Yeah, but it's all in its own intrinsic path, and I think we fall across things in our life, and it is intrinsic to us. I was at a talk recently, actually, and it comes in quite nicely to what we're saying. And this chap, he was a Japanese gardener, and he'd had an issue with his tomato plants. This is just a lovely little story. And there was a hole in this polytunnel, and the rain had come in and made everything moldy. And so he decided that he would go and get some expert advice. And he went to the farmers and said, this has happened to my tomatoes. What shall I do? And they said, take all the crops out, burn them, and never use the same space with the same plant,
Oh, blimey.
You hear these kind of like, this is what normal people do in this world.
Right.
So what he decided to do instead, he didn't do that. He actually had a serious word with his tomatoes. I thought that was just hilarious. And then he asked the soil to support the plant. And he didn't do anything with the compost. He didn't do anything, absolutely nothing. He just literally used his intent. And what he did was he actually brought some of the tomatoes along with him. And so he got 3 people from the audience to come up. So there was different types of people. So there was one really big chap and one quite a short lady. And anyway, so he got one of these little tomatoes and put them up the sleeve. But he'd done an experiment first. So they stood and they kind of clenched their hands, and he would push on them and they would fall over. And then he'd put one of these tomatoes, didn't really matter where, up the sleeve. And he put one of these tomatoes up their sleeves, and they were as solid as rocks after that.
Wow.
That is the difference, I think, in life, because something will either nourish us to the molecular level, to the, we are one, we are intrinsically one. But if we understand all those different aspects to it, and how our intention makes it alive, how it changes the structure of the water, how it supports the plant, and then the plant just happens to support us. I mean, how amazing. But
no, go on.
If water can heal us, and we can heal ourselves through these things. Another example, did you want to ask a question about that first before I go on? Just one more.
I can't remember the thought now, so you carry on, because they just come and go.
So Vida Austin, she was in a very bad car accident, actually, and she had, I think, green glass down one side of her body embedded in, and then on the other side of the body she had from the smash on from the windscreen. And she decided to kind of try different things in order to heal herself, and she had a really big journey on this. And I think it was on a 27-day water fast, and obviously we do water with minerals. Quite important.
Yeah.
But so during that fast, actually all the and this was years and years later as well. So all this glass just was coming out of her skin, and that was just through water and, and healing ourselves. So there are so many different ways for strength, for healing, for, but it also wants to upgrade us. So a really good example is like if you take one of, because we've got chuk-chuks here, hens, we call them chuk-chuks. But if you get one of their happy eggs, and then you put them in the middle of battery eggs. I mean, battery eggs, they don't necessarily have the loveliest life, do they? I mean,
No.
chickens get sung to, so they're a bit spoiled. And we have a glorious time in the fields together. But so they're happy eggs, and water, the structure of water always wants to upgrade us. And it's not the other way around. And, if you think about the influences, the galaxy, how rivers and everything is an intrinsic kind of organism. So a couple of conversations Thomas and I have been having about kind of waterfalls, and I was looking at this property and beautiful hall, but right next to it is this glorious waterfall. And what if that was rendered to be perfect and it was all overgrown and awful? And I feel so sorry for these beautiful places, and they've not been loved. But and Thomas has an example of when he did this I think it was in Bali, wasn't it? And you actually cleared all this waterfall and it created the rain clouds for you, or it created this symbiotic relationship that we have with water, and because water is in everything, But
Well, I was going to say, you've reminded me there, and let's just go back to Thomas before we sort of finish off. One of the things that my partner and I want to do is to have some land, and we were thinking about, water, and we'd heard, lots of stuff about water, and we're thinking how important it is. But it seems that to have water moving so that it's alive, going through different rocks, and as Rachel just said about waterfalls and things, that must be a benefit for not just your plants, but animals as well, if they're eating or drinking water, if water is constantly on the move. Does that make a big difference? And I'm sorry, I'm addressing that to Thomas.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. No, it makes a big difference. Well, I told her a story. I lived in Northern California, 80s and 90s, and on the Mattole River, and bought the place, had beautiful flow forms in the natural rock below it, which is what attracted me to the place. And every year around September, first year I went down there, it was all filled with leaves. So just afternoon, go hang out by the river. I started cleaning all the leaves out of the flow forms. I cleaned up the whole area. And by the time I was done, I could actually smell the ocean air coming up. We were 3 miles as the crow flies, but 25 miles because it came behind King Mountain there and stuff.
Right.
And I could start smelling the ocean air, and it rained the next day, heavy. It was the first rain of the season. So every year we did that. I'd get mates over, and we'd clean the river in late September, and it would always rain within 48 hours for that. But one thing I wanted to finish up an earlier thought, and I lost my track. You were asking about, this disconnection and what's happening. I was speaking of Lawrence Edwards and the tree buds. He had one tree, it wasn't reacting, right? The bud wasn't changing with the planets. He's going, geez, I wonder what that is. It's a big power transformer. It was cutting the tree off from the cosmic flows. And that's what's wrong with our society. We're cut off from the cosmos. And as Hans says, we need to reawaken this within ourselves, to evolve to the next stage. So this is where we're at, the crisis of humanity, which most people don't even notice.
And when you say that it's the power transformers, is that the sort of electrical magnetic forces that we've transferred our land with all these different radio signals from, long wave down to 5G?
We could do a whole show on that, Richard.
That's another issue altogether. Right. Well, we'll come back for that one, because I know that a lot of people are, particularly worried about the very tiny 5G type stuff and the EMFs, and we've seen how that is affecting people. I'd like to draw this to an end, if that's okay.
Yeah. Hans had something to say.
Oh, sorry, Hans.
Could I just add a quick solution to your 5G worry?
Please do.
Anyone who's out there, we have a responsibility now with one of the biodynamic preparations, in fact, but there's several, but one particularly based on silica, can strengthen the epidermis of every living being. And if we spray that in very fine dilution homeopathically across the earth, just like with the dying trees in the 90s, what they did with rock dust and saving the Austrian and Czechoslovakian German forests, we can actually save the insects even from this onslaught of the 5G network with the 15, 20,000 satellites up there bombarding the Earth with 5G and everybody who's out there exposed. So there is a preparation in biodynamics that I believe is going to save the epidermis of all living beings and protect it in that way that 5G can't penetrate even. It will help us. So reach out if you want to know more about that.
Is that something that's relatively easy for people to make up themselves?
It can be made very easily if you can stand the noise making it, because it's crushing quartz crystal.
Ah, right. Oh, okay.
To 1 to 5 microns, and then you spread it through, submitting it to a vortex experience of 1 hour, changing the energy and the level of charge that you get. It will then, both through charge and through its way of stimulating the strengthening of any skin, epidermis, human, animal, or plant, or insects, and will heal that kind of condition that we're finding right now, which is really rife since the 80s, also with increased ultraviolet.
Well, I'm sure people would be fascinated to learn more about that, because that is a big worry in the West and ever increasing. And as you said, with all the blooming satellites that they've shoved up, of which nobody's consented to, I don't think. None of us have sort of said, that we'd love to have that radiation on us. Please go ahead. Rachel, thank you so much for bringing these wonderful men to the table today. It's been an absolute joy. I'd just like to say, whilst Hans is there on the screen, thank you so much, Hans, for your wonderful biodynamic knowledge and sharing. We'll put links to your website, and you run courses from time to time that people can come along, and it is great fun. I've been there, especially around the fire with the old storytelling and gatherings of stuff. But getting out there with the real growing vegetables and understanding something that possibly most people have not yet really, it's deep within them that it needs reawakening. So thank you so much. To Thomas, thank you so much, Thomas. If you just say something, we'll get your picture on the screen.
Sure.
That's the way Zoom works.
Thank you, Richard. It was fun scratching the surface.
Yes,
this is such a deep subject, but we covered a lot of ground, and I really appreciate your time. It's been wonderful. And thanks to Hans and Rachel for everything they're doing. It's just fantastic.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, and people can get a sample, a bit more of a scratch, as it were, from the talks that you've already done that are now available on video.
Yes.
From in Birmingham. So thank you so much, Thomas. And Rachel, thank you for bringing this together. I was a little bit nervous about how we were going to conduct it, but hopefully people have enjoyed it. I appreciate you coming along and doing it, and thank you for introducing me to these fine gentlemen and going on Hans's weekend. It's been absolutely fascinating. This is a subject, I think, excuse the pun, is going to grow and grow as we explore more and open our minds. That's the biggest part, isn't it?
Well, we need healing, we need to create this new world, and just to be conscious of it, I think, and just showing up is probably the first step.
Absolutely.
There are all the intrinsic elements of it, but I think when we come together and we actually meet people, we understand where we are and how we can grow and how we can upgrade ourselves, essentially. But
it's an exciting time to be around, isn't it?
Jolly well is. This is such a wonderful world, and there are so many good people doing good things. And if we just focused on those parts, and the other nonsense would just kind of fall by the wayside, basically.
Absolutely. Keep our attention where it should be.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Rachel, Thomas, and Hans for joining me today. I'll be back with more monologues and more wonderful guests with interesting ideas. Until next time, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.